The screams echoed through the limestone corridors of Memphis as the bronze blade made its first incision. The condemned man's flesh parted like papyrus under the executioner's practiced hand, revealing the crimson reality beneath. This was not mere punishment. This was the systematic dismantling of a soul deemed unworthy of existence itself. In the shadow of the great pyramids, where the very stones seemed to pulse with divine authority, justice took forms that would make modern minds recoil. Yet for the ancient Egyptians, these brutal punishments were not acts of cruelty, but sacred necessities, each one carefully designed to restore the cosmic balance that crime had disrupted. The concept of ma'at, truth, justice, and universal order permeated every aspect of Egyptian society. When someone committed a crime, they didn't merely break human law, they tore at the very fabric of creation itself. The punishment, therefore, had to be equally cosmic in its scope and terror in its execution. Public flaying, the ultimate desecration. Of all the punishments reserved for the most heinous crimes, none struck more terror into the hearts of Egyptians than public flaying, the systematic removal of skin from a living person. This fate awaited those who dared commit the ultimate transgressions, assassinating the pharaoh, engaging in high-level corruption, or profaning sacred temples. The process began at dawn, when the crowds would gather in the central courtyard of the palace or temple complex. The condemned, bound with rope made from Nile reeds, would be secured to a vertical wooden frame. The executioner, often a priest trained in the sacred arts of punishment, would begin the methodical process of separation, skin from muscle, identity from form. But the horror extended beyond the physical act. The flayed skin was often displayed publicly, stretched on wooden frames, and positioned at city gates or temple entrances. These macabre banners served as stark reminders of what awaited those who challenged divine order. The message was clear: defy the gods, and not only would you suffer unimaginable agony, but your very flesh would become a monument to your transgression. The theological underpinning of this punishment lay in Egyptian beliefs about the afterlife. The skin was considered the boundary between the mortal and divine realms. By removing it, the executioners weren't just killing the body. They were ensuring that the soul would be forever marked, forever recognizable to the gods as unworthy of redemption. The severed tongue, silencing the sacred word. Words held immense power in ancient Egypt. They could invoke gods, cast curses, or speak truth that challenged the established order. When someone used their tongue to lie against the pharaoh, commit blasphemy, or bear false witness, the punishment was swift and symbolic, the complete removal of the organ that had offended the divine. The ceremony typically took place in the Hall of Two Truths, where the goddess Ma'at herself was said to preside over justice. The condemned would be forced to kneel before a statue of the deity, their mouth pried open with bronze implements. The tongue would then be grasped with specially crafted pincers and severed with a ceremonial blade, often made from meteoric iron, metal that had fallen from the heavens. The severed tongue was not discarded, but preserved in natron salt and placed in a sealed jar, which was then buried in the desert sands far from any settlement. This ritual burial ensured that the offending words could never be spoken again, not even in the afterlife. Those who survived this punishment faced a life of silence, unable to speak the sacred words necessary for passage into the afterlife. They became living reminders of the power of speech and the terrible consequences of its misuse. If you're fascinated by these dark chapters of ancient history, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. These stories of justice and punishment reveal the complex moral landscape of one of history's greatest civilizations. Like this video if you want to see more content about the hidden truths of the ancient world, and comment below with your thoughts on how these ancient concepts of justice compare to modern legal systems. The sand shifted restlessly above the makeshift grave as Kayamwasit's muffled screams grew weaker. 3 feet of desert earth pressed down on the wooden planks that covered his prone body, creating a coffin from which there would be no resurrection. This was the fate of tomb robbers, those who violated the sacred resting places of the dead. Unlike the elaborate mummification chambers of the pharaohs, this burial was deliberately crude, hastily constructed to ensure maximum suffering. The condemned was placed in a simple wooden box, barely large enough to contain a human body, with small holes drilled to allow just enough air to prolong the agony. The box was then lowered into a shallow pit in the Valley of the Kings, where the desert heat would intensify the claustrophobic horror. Burial alive, the thief's eternal prison. Necropolis crimes, the robbery or desecration of tombs, represented one of the most serious offenses in ancient Egyptian society. The dead were not merely buried, they were equipped for an eternal journey that required specific artifacts, amulets, and provisions. To steal from a tomb was to condemn a soul to eternal poverty in the afterlife, a crime that demanded equally eternal punishment. The process of live burial was carefully orchestrated to maximize both physical and spiritual suffering. The condemned would be brought to the necropolis at sunset, when the boundary between the world of the living and the dead was considered most permeable. Priests would perform a reverse mummification ritual, wrapping the living person in plain linen strips while reciting curses instead of protective spells. The theological significance of this punishment extended beyond mere retribution. By burying the criminal alive without proper funeral rites, the authorities ensured that the offender would be trapped between life and death, unable to complete the journey to the afterlife. This liminal state was considered worse than death itself, as it condemned the soul to eternal wandering. Archaeological evidence suggests that these live burials were conducted in specific locations, often near the tombs that had been violated. The proximity was intentional. The buried criminal would serve as a guardian of sorts, their eternal suffering acting as a deterrent to future tomb robbers, while simultaneously appeasing the spirits of the deceased whose rest had been disturbed. Mutilation, the mark of disgrace. For lesser crimes that nonetheless demanded permanent punishment, the ancient Egyptians employed a sophisticated system of mutilation that served multiple purposes: immediate justice, long-term deterrence, and social marking. The specific body part removed corresponded directly to the nature of the crime, creating a visible narrative of transgression that would follow the criminal for life. Thieves faced the removal of their hands, the tools of their trade. The amputation was performed in public squares, often during market days when the largest crowds would gather. The severed hand would be preserved in salt and displayed at the marketplace for a full lunar month, serving as a tangible reminder of the consequences of theft. The surgical precision required for these procedures reveals the advanced medical knowledge of ancient Egyptian practitioners. The cuts were made with bronze or copper blades, heated to cauterize the wound and prevent excessive bleeding. Skilled physicians would often supervise the procedure to ensure the criminal survived the punishment and lived to bear its mark. Runaway slaves received distinctive mutilations, typically the removal of ears or the branding of specific symbols on their faces. These marks were designed to be immediately recognizable, making it impossible for the fugitive to blend into society in distant towns or cities. The mutilation served as a permanent identity document, marking the bearer as property of a specific master. The psychological impact of these mutilations extended beyond the physical disability. In a society where physical wholeness was considered essential for successful passage into the afterlife, the mutilated criminal faced not only social ostracism in life, but also potential exclusion from eternal paradise. The gods, it was believed, would recognize the marks of earthly punishment and judge accordingly. Some mutilations carried additional symbolic weight. The removal of the nose, for instance, was reserved for those who had betrayed trust or committed acts of deception. The nose was associated with the breath of life and the ability to discern truth from falsehood. Its removal symbolically severed the connection between the criminal and the divine breath that sustained all life. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications to continue following this dark journey through ancient Egyptian justice. The next chapter will explore even more chilling punishments that blur the line between justice and religious ritual. Hit the like button if these historical revelations fascinate you, and share your thoughts in the comments about how these ancient practices shaped society and individual behavior. The murky waters of the Nile closed over Amenhotep's head as the weighted ropes dragged him beneath the surface. But this was no ordinary drowning. This was a ritual offering to the gods themselves, a punishment reserved for those who had dared to steal from the sacred precincts of Isis and Osiris. The priest, standing waist-deep in the river, held an ankh in one hand and a ceremonial dagger in the other, his lips moving in ancient incantations that would ensure the condemned soul's direct passage to divine judgment. The waters that gave life to Egypt would now serve as the final arbiter of justice, swallowing the transgressor whole. Ritual drowning, the Nile's divine judgment. The sacred nature of the Nile River in ancient Egyptian cosmology made it the perfect instrument for punishing religious crimes. Those who stole sacred statues, profaned the mysteries of Isis, or violated the sanctity of Osiris's rituals faced a death that was simultaneously punishment and religious ceremony. The ritual drowning was conducted at specific locations along the Nile, usually near temple complexes where the crime had been committed. The condemned would be brought to the river at dawn, when the first light of Ra touched the water's surface. Priests would perform purification rituals, not to cleanse the criminal, but to sanctify the water that would receive them. The process was methodical and symbolic. The condemned would be weighted down with stones, carved with hieroglyphic curses, ensuring that their body would sink and remain beneath the sacred waters. This submersion was crucial. It prevented the normal mummification process and ensured that the criminal's soul would be judged directly by the gods of the river. The theological implications were profound. The Nile was considered the earthly manifestation of the celestial river that the sun god Ra traveled each night through the underworld. By drowning the criminal in these sacred waters, the authorities were delivering them directly to the realm of the gods, bypassing the normal processes of death and judgment that allowed for potential redemption. Witnesses to these drownings reported that the waters themselves seemed to participate in the punishment. The Nile would often be in flood season during these ceremonies, its swollen banks and powerful currents adding to the sense of divine participation in the act of justice. The condemned would disappear beneath the muddy waters, their fate sealed by the very force that sustained Egyptian civilization. Impalement, the traitor's slow agony. For crimes against the state, military treason, conspiracy against the pharaoh, or attempts to undermine the divine order of the kingdom, the ancient Egyptians reserved perhaps their most psychologically devastating punishment, impalement. This was not merely execution, but a prolonged spectacle of agony designed to break the spirit before it destroyed the body. The method of impalement used in ancient Egypt was calculated to maximize suffering while ensuring the victim remained conscious for as long as possible. A sharpened wooden stake, often made from acacia wood, considered sacred to the gods, would be carefully inserted through the body in a manner that avoided immediate damage to vital organs. The condemned would be positioned in public squares, often in front of administrative buildings or military barracks, where their prolonged death would serve as a deterrent to others contemplating similar crimes. The process could take days, during which the victim would be visible to all who passed by, their agony a constant reminder of the consequences of betraying the divine order. The positioning of the impaled body was highly symbolic. The stake was oriented to point toward the east, the direction of the rising sun, and the realm of the gods. This alignment ensured that the dying traitor would face the divine judgment of Ra as the sun god made his daily journey across the sky. The criminal's suffering would be witnessed by the gods themselves, validating the righteousness of the punishment. The public nature of impalement served multiple purposes beyond deterrence. It demonstrated the pharaoh's absolute power over life and death, reinforcing the divine nature of royal authority. Citizens would be required to witness the punishment, particularly those in positions of authority or military command. The sight of a traitor's slow death would be seared into their memory, creating a powerful psychological barrier against future acts of rebellion. The bodies of the impaled were left exposed until they decomposed naturally, a process that could take weeks in the dry Egyptian climate. This extended display was intentional. It prevented the normal funeral rites that would allow the soul to travel to the afterlife. The traitor's spirit would be trapped in the decaying flesh, unable to complete the journey to judgment and eternal life. Archaeological evidence from execution sites reveals the careful planning that went into these public displays. Stone platforms were constructed to elevate the impaled bodies, making them visible from greater distances. Drainage channels were carved to manage the bodily fluids that would accumulate over time, maintaining the site's function as a place of public punishment. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell to catch the final chapter of this chilling exploration of ancient Egyptian justice. We're building a community of history enthusiasts who want to understand the darker truths of our past. Like this video to support our research into these forgotten aspects of ancient civilizations, and let us know in the comments which of these punishments you find most revealing about Egyptian society and values. The chisel struck the limestone with methodical precision, each blow erasing another hieroglyph from the tomb wall. The name of Khentikawes, once carved with reverence and care, disappeared under a cascade of stone dust. This was not mere vandalism. This was the systematic annihilation of a soul, the complete erasure of a human being from the memory of the world. In the flickering light of oil lamps, teams of scribes worked through the night, their hands moving across papyrus scrolls with deadly purpose. Every mention of the condemned name was being struck from the records, every reference to their existence methodically obliterated. This was damnatio memoriae, the forgetting forced upon those who had committed the ultimate transgression against the cosmic order, the punishment beyond death. Of all the brutal punishments devised by ancient Egyptian justice, none inspired more absolute terror than the erasure of one's name from all records, monuments, and memory. This was not merely a death sentence, it was a condemnation to non-existence, a fate that struck at the very core of Egyptian beliefs about identity, legacy, and the afterlife. The ancient Egyptians understood that a person's name was not simply a label, but the essence of their being. The name carried the soul's power, its connection to the divine, and its ability to continue existing after physical death. To speak someone's name was to keep them alive in the world of spirits. To erase it completely was to murder them not just in body, but in eternity itself. The process of damnatio memoriae was exhaustive and terrifying in its thoroughness. It began with the removal of the condemned person's name from all official documents, administrative records, and religious texts. Scribes would work in teams, methodically going through archives that stretched back generations, seeking out every instance of the forbidden name. The systematic destruction of identity, the physical erasure, was only the beginning. Stone carvers would be dispatched to tombs, temples, and monuments where the condemned person's name appeared. Using specialized tools, they would carefully chip away each hieroglyph, often replacing the original text with neutral phrases or the names of other individuals. The precision required was extraordinary. Each symbol had to be completely obliterated while leaving the surrounding text intact. The process extended to artwork and sculptures. If the condemned person appeared in relief carvings or paintings, their image would be systematically defaced. Faces would be chiseled away, bodies reduced to anonymous silhouettes. In some cases, entire figures would be replaced with different people, creating a revised history where the condemned had never existed. Personal belongings and artifacts were not spared. Any item bearing the forbidden name would be destroyed or have its inscriptions removed. Jewelry, pottery, furniture, and even everyday objects would be gathered and either melted down or broken beyond recognition. The goal was to eliminate every trace of the person's existence from the material world. The psychological impact of this punishment extended far beyond the condemned individual. Family members would be forced to participate in the erasure, removing their loved one's name from family records and burial preparations. Children would be forbidden to speak their parents' name. Siblings would have to act as though their brother or sister had never been born. The entire social network surrounding the condemned person would be complicit in their eternal elimination. The theological horror. The religious implications of damnatio memoriae were perhaps the most terrifying aspect of this punishment. Ancient Egyptians believed that the journey to the afterlife required specific knowledge and preparation. The deceased needed to know their own name to identify themselves to the gods, to recite the proper spells, and to claim their place in the eternal realm. Without a name, the soul would be lost in the underworld, unable to complete the trials necessary for resurrection. They would wander the dark passages of the Duat, the realm of the dead, forever searching for an identity that no longer existed. This was considered a fate infinitely worse than physical death, as it condemned the individual to eternal confusion and isolation. The Book of the Dead, the collection of spells and instructions for navigating the afterlife, emphasized the crucial importance of knowing one's name. The deceased would be questioned by various gods and demons, required to state their identity clearly and confidently. Without this knowledge, they would be devoured by the monsters of the underworld or simply fade into nothingness. The erasure also affected the judgment of the dead. In the famous scene of the weighing of the heart, the deceased's heart would be placed on a scale opposite the feather of Ma'at, the goddess of truth and justice. The heart would be questioned about the life it had lived, the deeds it had performed, and the name it had carried. A heart without a name could not be judged, leaving the soul trapped in an eternal limbo. The ultimate deterrent. The threat of damnatio memoriae served as perhaps the most effective deterrent in ancient Egyptian society. The punishment was reserved for the most serious crimes: treason against the pharaoh, desecration of sacred sites, or corruption that threatened the stability of the kingdom. Even the whisper of such a fate would be enough to prevent most individuals from contemplating serious crimes. The process was irreversible and absolute. Once the erasure began, there was no appeal, no possibility of redemption or restoration.